So thank you guys for all joining to us. We're super excited. So this is really meant to be like a casual conversation. We're gonna really encourage, questions from the audience and have a discussion. Dr. Bell, I see that you put some slides into the slide deck. So thank you for doing that. We'll make sure to go through that as well.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Sorry, I had to step away to boil some water.
Oh, that's okay. Are you cooking lunch right now?
No, I was making tea. Yeah, so.
Blake, I left some comments in the document for you, the annotated agenda. Just like, could you drop this in the chat or?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. I won't be able to see anything in the chat during this, just the way that my computers are set up and the way that they, whatever, the way that they get with the Zoom. So just as an FYI, I will not be able to see the chat.
Okay, I also got your email with the other stuff.
Okay.
So I will keep an eye out when to drop those and everything.
Okay, sounds good. This might be Mohammed. Let me admit and see.
So Aisha, you can't see anything in the chat right now. Is that correct?
Yeah, I can't.
Okay. So I posted a question to you. We're to hide our videos. Is that correct?
I think that when you're not speaking, and just to give, whoever is speaking that respect, just like, putting it off would be great.
Okay. So we're not expected to describe ourselves like we talked about at our meeting earlier, like introduce ourselves and describe ourselves, right?
I think the people who have speaking parts will. So like
excellent.
Part.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Yep. I'm just gonna admit Trina and admit Mohammed. Hi, Mohammed. Thank you so much for joining us. And hi, Trina. Let me put the annotated agenda in the chat again. And to any of our panelists, do you guys have any questions for us?
I don't think I have any questions. Christian, do you have any questions, or Mohammed?
Yeah, I did have a question. So, I know you're going based off our feedback. So, if we give you suggestions, what are you going to do to like implement them or maybe make sure that maybe some of them happen?
Yeah, good question. So, these sessions are also about really trying to get the school. I mean, there's like 150 some people who have signed up for this across the university. So it's also about trying to get students to think about what they can do to engage in collective action around some of these issues. So we put together a resource document of, let's say that you have campaign events coming up or you have action that you want us to participate in. Let us know about it on this call. And then I'll also follow up with you and I'll get the information from you in writing. And we'll send out an email to all the participants, reminding them that like, these are upcoming events. This is how you can get more involved. This is where you can go to learn more about this issue. Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you.
I just want to say good morning to everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Good morning, good morning, good morning. I'm deciding whether or not to get another cup of coffee or not. Trying to figure out whether or not I need more coffee in my system.
How about this? If you go, I'll go, because I need to get something too.
So also as a reminder, I cannot see that for everyone who just joined and may not have heard me previously, I cannot see the chat, which I'm gonna have to figure out with IT why that happens on my computers. And also I can't see the participant list right now. So if you could admit people at 12.
Wait, Aisha, click on chat and see if it shows up. It should show up.
It won't show up. I've tried.
Really?
Yeah.
So
Like
you might need to update Zoom, Aisha. I don't think it's a computer issue, it's a Zoom issue. Might need to update it.
you're probably right. I just got a new computer from the school, and it is like a 1985 operating system.
Yeah, but I don't think that the computer has anything to do with that specific.
Yeah.
So check your updates later on, not today.
Okay, I'll do that. And so I am going to be doing the slides, Fatima. And Fatima, you're going to help with chat. Sonia, you'll help with chat. Blake will help with notes. If there's a question in the chat, will you guys text me? Let me start a chat text with all of us.
Good idea, Aisha.
Okay. And Fatima, can you do the music when people start entering?
Are we playing any music?
I thought that Fatima was going to do the music. Fatima, are you able to do the music?
I can. Do you want it right now?
I mean, I guess we have 5 more minutes, like 6 more minutes, so it's okay.
Yeah, we've got time.
And you can all see my screen with captions on, right?
Yep.
I don't see the captions, but maybe I just have to like put the captions on. Is it like the live transcript feature on Zoom?
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
I think you're right. I think that everyone has to do it on their own.
Oh, okay. Cool.
Richard,
I think Trina will be guiding people to activate their closed captioning.
Cool.
So at noon, Blake, will you let people into the room?
Yes, I can do that.
Okay, thanks.
Tell me if this is too loud.
Fighter, you're a lover. You're strong and
Is that okay for sound?
That sounds good.
from what you're a
Okay, before it's too late for me to ask, are they gonna pop up under participants like they did last time, or is my update gonna mess me up? And are the people in the waiting room gonna be somewhere else?
They should be under your participant list, under the
Okay.
waiting room section, which is at the top. So it'll say
Okay, I don't know
waiting
if I'm allowed
Oh,
because I'm not a host.
Let me give you privileges right now, so you are allowed. Good point.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Perfect. Oh, there we go. Yes.
Good point.
Blake, will you be dropping links in the chat or will I be doing that?
I can, and then unless if I miss one or something, absolutely do it. Help, but I should be good if you want to focus on the other tasks that you have.
Sounds good. Thanks.
So like one person has to drop the links in the chat, and I assigned them to Blake. They're highlighted in blue in the annotated agenda, and they have a comment next to them. They're in the annotated agenda, the links. And then just another person. So Sonia, if you could be the one who's taking notes on the session. Okay, it's 12 p.m.
Yep.
We have about 40 people in the waiting room, or 35.
You're a lover. You're strong and you recover from whatever gets you down. And there's so many reasons. Anytime, any season is the right time to be with you. Hello, Detroit. You won more. Your renaissance and waterfronts give you a flair of your own. Irresistible you. Again, kissable you. You're alive with so much feeling that I will always
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Trina Shanks. I'm a professor at the University of Michigan School of Social Work. Thanks so much for joining us. We're going to have an excellent session today. I'd like to say that I use the pronouns she, her, and hers. I have short black hair, I'm wearing glasses, and an olive green jacket. Just a quick note about accessibility. If you hit CC at the bottom, that's for closed captioning or show subtitle, and it will allow you to toggle between, to show the subtitles. And then you can also toggle between gallery and speaker view by clicking view at the top to see the PowerPoint of the person who's speaking if you don't want to see all the squares at once. Our session today is dedicated to exploring the racial disparities we see in the way children are treated and punished in public schools, specifically exploring the prevalence of police in Detroit public schools. And before I hand it off to our special esteemed guest today, I'd like to introduce the rest of the Engage team. As you can see here on the slides, Sonia Harb, Aisha Ghazi Edwin, Fatima Salman, and our two interns, Blake Newman and Cleo. And at that point, and if you want to look at any of our past sessions, you can go to our website and see those. And as of now, I will turn it over to Aisha.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Aisha Ghazi Edwin. I use the pronouns she, her, and hers. And I'm a person with short black hair wearing a blue shirt. And I'll be facilitating the session today. So first, as a quick reminder, students of the Engage Community Mini Course, please stay on after the session ends briefly. And to all participants, this is meant to be an interactive session. So please feel free to type any questions you may have into the chat. And when we get a chance, we will unmute you so you can speak directly to our presenters today. So as Dr. Shanks described, this is a special session exploring the prevalence of police specifically in Detroit public schools. And it was inspired by an op-ed that was written by youth activists for the organization 482 Forward. I'm going to go ahead and share this link to the op-ed in the chat right now, and I encourage you to take a look at it when you can. So today we have some amazing guests, as you guys can see on the slide. So please join me in welcoming both youth organizers and scholars in criminal justice reform and the school to prison pipeline from Detroit. So first, we have scholar, activist, native Detroiter, and current assistant professor of criminal justice at Illinois State University, Dr. Charles Bell, Christian Matthews, member of the 482 Youth Organizing Collective and Detroit Heals Detroit, Mohammed Muntakim, member of the 482 Youth Organizing Collective, and Dylan Cathro, director of youth organizing at 482 Forward. So I'd like to give each of our speakers just a few minutes to introduce themselves. Please make sure to note down your pronouns, as well as just short descriptors of yourselves, just to make our session more accessible for everyone. And I'd love if you could talk briefly just about the work that you do and why you're involved in this movement. So Dr. Bell, why don't we start with you?
Sure. My name is Dr. Charles Bell. I'm a criminal justice professor at Illinois State University. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm wearing a black suit jacket with a blue shirt. And I'm deeply passionate about school discipline reform and very happy to be here today to speak with you.
Thank you for joining us. Christian, would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, hi. My name is Christian Matthews. I'm 17 years old. I have short hair now, and I'm wearing a gray shirt that says, practice is my happy hour. I am with Detroit Heals Detroit, and I'm also with 482 Forward. It's like a youth coalition. I also am very excited to be here. I always love speaking at things where I feel like I could personally help, especially where it affects me. So thank you for allowing me to be here.
Thank you for joining. We're excited to have someone who's directly involved in the movement. Mohammed, would you like to go ahead?
Hello, everyone. My name is Mohammed Muntakim. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I'm currently wearing glasses with a gray sweatshirt. And I'm a high school senior, and I've been attending Detroit public schools since my elementary years. And recently, over the past few months, I've been researching police presence in Detroit schools and their impacts as an intern with 482 Forward. And I'm also a member of their youth collective. So I'm excited to be here. Thank you for the opportunity. And I'm happy to be here to share things that I've learned from my research.
Excited to hear more from you about the topic. Dylan, would you like to go ahead?
Sure. Can everybody hear me? Okay. Sometimes my audio is weird. Hi, everybody. My name is Dylan Cathro. I use he, him pronouns. Currently working as the director of youth organizing at 482 Forward, which is dope. It means that I just get to work with the youth and they tell me what they want to do and then we do it. So that's pretty much what my job description is. Let's see, I'm wearing blue glasses, like a sky blue sweater, and then I have very curly hair, which I love very dearly. And that's pretty much about me for the moment. So yeah, super happy to be here and to do a lot of listening as to what our youth and also Dr. Bell have to say about the work that we're working on.
Thank you for joining us. Thank you all of you for joining us. So Dr. Bell, you dropped some slides into the slide deck, and I was wondering if you wanted to start and kind of give us a big picture on this issue.
Sure. So over the last, I would say, 5 years, I have been conducting research in the Detroit area, particularly Detroit area schools, interviewing African-American students and parents to gain an understanding of how they view metal detectors, school guards, law enforcement officers in public schools, and then the entire sort of how school suspensions impact their grades, social status, parents' employment. Probably one of the most comprehensive studies of school discipline to date. And what I found is that Black students and parents overwhelmingly have negative perceptions of metal detectors, school guards, and law enforcement officers. Here on this particular slide, I interviewed Clara, who's the mother of a sophomore. And what she found is that whenever she entered the school building, the metal detectors were unplugged. And she was really adamant and kind of frustrated about this, as many parents were, because what is the point of having the metal detector there if it's not plugged up, if it's not working? And this was a common complaint amongst other parents, that the school safety measures that were embedded in their school were not working as they should be working. So if you read this quote here, Clara says, yes, her son's school has metal detectors, but it's useless. Most of the time they don't work. They're always unplugged. And she actually asked last year, why are these not plugged up? They're not working. And the response is just, they're there, they're not working. And many parents are just frustrated by this. You have this criminalization of their children with the metal detectors in many cases, but even with parents who may have held mixed perceptions of school safety measures, where they felt they were necessary to some degree, they were confused by the fact that they're not working, they're not plugged up, and they're not doing what they're supposed to do.
Dr. Bell, can you tell us a little bit more, or any of our guest presenters, about kind of the extent of policing in Detroit public schools?
Yeah, so Detroit Public Schools is actually the first district in the country to install metal detectors at all of its sort of main entrances and force guests and students to walk through them. This goes back to 1985, actually. So as many districts to this date are discussing the relevance and importance of metal detectors and school resource officers, Detroit Public Schools is probably one of the only districts in the country that has had multiple generations of students, at least 3 generations of students, matriculate through schools that have mandatory metal detectors at the front entrances. And for many students, that's tragic. Not only tragic, but it's traumatizing as well. As many students in subsequent slides have talked about how the metal detectors and school guards have criminalized them, have engaged in strip searches, which we'll talk a lot about as well.
Yeah, I was reading in the op-ed that was sent in the chat by the youth activists from 482 Forward about how just the presence of police in public schools can be so traumatizing, because when there's a fight, a police officer is involved, and suddenly there's this threat of, am I in legal trouble? Is my family in legal trouble? And it gets in the way of students learning real skills, conflict management skills. So it is tragic. Would you like me to go to the next slide?
Yes. So in this slide, this is a particularly difficult sort of interview because Donovan here is describing how the security guards at his school have aggressively handled him in many interactions. So when I interviewed him, I asked him, how do you feel about the security guards at his school? And he says, he doesn't like the security guards because they're too rough. They've got the power to make up anything to add to your suspensions, which is a completely separate issue. But like when you're late and the teachers are saying, get out, you're getting your stuff together, you're getting out of the classroom, and the security guard will grab you by your arm. I want you to visualize this. Someone grabbing you by your arm and literally pushing you and tossing you out of the classroom. And I want the audience to understand that he's not exaggerating here because we've seen video clips of students who were literally tossed out of classrooms with a very aggressive interactions with law enforcement. They're handling students and engaging in a sort of violence that is completely inappropriate when you're dealing with young people who are in school and really there to learn. And I think that's the key that we're all missing is that these kids are here to learn. Many times they're navigating really extreme challenges in their communities, but they're showing up every day to learn, only to be aggressively handled by law enforcement and sort of removed strategically, in many cases unfairly, from class.
Yeah. When you think about what it does to a child, it's almost like trying to get them used to living in a police state where they're going to be criminalized for their behavior. I want to give the other presenters a chance to potentially jump in. For our students that are here, what have you seen in your schools?
To elaborate on that, I go to a school that's majority Black with pockets of immigrant populations from usually Hispanic, Desi, Bengali, and Arab. So these students are either majority Black or from majority immigrant communities. So like Dr. Bell mentioned, a lot of times these police measures that are in schools are not there for security or to prevention. It's more of harming students and their perspective in terms of learning. So one thing that I've realized over time and through my research is also as I was researching, I learned that the first group of SROs were put into schools in the early 1940s in Flint, Michigan, to kind of bridge that connection among students and law enforcement. And today in our schools, it's quite the opposite. When a student sees a police officer, they walk the other way. When the police officers are usually chasing students to get them to be disciplined. So I think now the relationship is students are fearful, not only about their lives, but also their education, because once you get suspended or you get disciplined, it's hard to get off that target list. Yeah.
Thanks so much for sharing. And, by mentioning Flynn, actually, this is a quote, and we'll get back to some of the slides you shared previously, Dr. Bell, in a second. This is a quote I pulled from the Electablog op-ed that organizers from 4824 wrote. And the student was sharing that the only districts that have their own police department are Detroit, Benton Harbor, and Flint. And this was police departments in the schools, all of which happen to be predominantly Black. So we know that this is a racial issue. This is fundamentally, there's racism and anti-Blackness that underlies this issue. Can you talk a little bit to that, Dr. Bell, or any of the students, just how you've seen it play out?
Sure. And I would love to hear some students talk about this as well. And I would like to say that I'm a graduate of Detroit Public Schools. I graduated from Denby High. And even as I navigated Detroit Public Schools, I was quite shocked to see the intense security measures that were there. You have the metal detectors, you have your guards, you have gang squad, you have security cameras. And how do you learn in that kind of an environment where you're constantly watching your back, hoping that, someone or a law enforcement officer doesn't kind of grab you or mistake you for someone who's doing something illegal based on your attire, whether you're wearing baggy pants or a black hooded sweatshirt, and you're just there to learn in many cases. And I think that disconnect is so important because in many cases, I actually moved out of my parents' home when I was in high school, and I was kind of struggling financially. I know several other students that were experiencing some financial challenges at the same time I was. And I wore my hooded sweatshirt because that's pretty much all I had at the time. And I think that in many cases, school officials and security guards are completely missing the fact that some of the kids are really struggling. And you're criminalizing them in many cases, which is completely unfair. Now, to the anti-Blackness that we're seeing in schools, I think that schools are the first institution that are introducing children to what it means to be sort of inferior or not equal in American society, with the hyper surveillance that children are experiencing, with the combination of fewer resources. And in my study, students were very aware of all of this. They were aware that their schools had metal detectors, guards, law enforcement officers, and security cameras. They were aware that their schools did not have the resources they needed to accomplish their dreams of becoming doctors, lawyers, or other occupations. And they were aware that those differences did not exist in many suburban areas. So like in Bloomfield Hills, there's no metal detectors and guards there, and they have books and they have resources, and they're questioning why. And that's where that sort of indoctrination into anti-Blackness, that you don't deserve those books. And that's what the school is communicating to children. You don't deserve resources. You deserve to be policed. You're dangerous. You're violent. And we have to question what sort of mindset, what sort of messages are schools sending to our children, and how are they making sense of those messages? Because when children internalize those messages, it can be devastating. They give up, they fail, or they even self-sabotage and end up in the school to prison pipeline through happenstance.
So you mentioned about resources, and we know that if there's resources being devoted to policing and safety measures in the schools, those are resources that are being taken from somewhere else, potentially vital, needed resources that could help children thrive. Dylan, I saw in the chat that you were mentioning just about how much money just in personnel costs is being devoted to policing schools. Do you want to jump in here and elaborate a little bit on that?
For sure, and I'm going to turn it over to the youth because I talk too much on a daily. So, but yeah, so as I was putting in the chat, right, so about a little over $33 million currently goes into school police officers, security guards, and also surveillance cameras, metal detectors, and IDs. So that's the experience that people in Detroit public schools, such as Mohammed, are living, right? Comparatively, you have roughly $1.2 million that goes into nursing, which means you have one nurse for every 2,900 students. Keep in mind that DPSCD has 50,000 students, so that's a lot. The district currently employs 12 social workers for a grand total of $779,000, meaning you have one social worker for every 4,100 students, right? And then they employ 96 guidance counselors. I have the stats right here on my computer. That's why I know these numbers, for about $6 million, right? And so think about that, right? You have, and then I saw a question about what the average yearly spending is, or what the yearly spending is for staff, teachers, and non-law enforcement. I don't have that on me, but I will get it. But I know the average teacher makes about 50 grand a year in Detroit public schools, depending on experience, right? And so think about that. If you've got 121 police officers and the grand total for their specific spending is $14 million, they're making more than teachers are, which is wild to me. That's wild to me. You're paying police officers and security guards more money than you are the teachers who are doing the actual pedagogy, or they're supposed to be. So those are some stats, and these are publicly available. You know, DPSCD is a public school, so their budget is available, but they do a really good job of hiding it, as you can see why. But I want to turn it over to Mohammed and Christian, because Christian also goes to a charter school. And so, you know, we chose these two students because they're excellent, and also they have two experiences of divestment from mental health and other needed resources in very different contexts, right? So I'm going to turn it over to them, and I'll find some more sites for y'all.
Just echoing off Dylan, I kind of wanted to mention that throughout my time at Detroit Public Schools, we've always been kind of labeled as the lacking in terms of education, the lower performing in terms of the state and also the country. I think one of the things that society fails to acknowledge is that, to Dylan's point, when you take away a lot of resources and a lot of things from the schools and you replace them with disciplinary actions, like in terms of policing with the budgeting. If you look at the budgeting compared to suburban schools, it's one of the main reasons why Detroit lacks in education. So not only is police presence harmful to students directly, but it also impacts their education, like how far they can get in life, because you're taking away the resources to put in police officers into school. And I think when we compare these urban students in Detroit to suburban students, we fail to acknowledge their experiences. And I think personally, I tend to believe if you give the same resources that you give suburban kids, if you give the same resources to Detroit kids that you give to suburban kids, I think you'll see the educational level rise in Detroit. And that's what we're working on. We're working on finding a way where we can divest from policing and invest in students' needs. And that goes to Dylan's point, from books to teachers, to mental health resources to counselors and things of that nature. Because ultimately, if we want to raise the entire district and the educational level and the futures of children, this project or this campaign where we divest from police is an important one.
I want to come back to you talking about the campaign to divest from police and what that has looked like and what you're doing in a bit. But I want to turn it over to Christian. And would you like to share some of your experience being at a charter school?
Yeah, I don't know if it's my computer or because my audio is like I really cannot hear anyone. But I would like to speak to I do go to a charter school, but I feel like my school operates kind of like a public school, but we don't have like police in our schools. But because my school, Detroit Leadership Academy, is so small, I guess maybe they feel like we don't need them. I personally do not have good experience with police. And if you want kids to come to school, a lot of kids, especially Black kids, they already have a bad experience with police, most of them. Like a family member is locked up or said got pulled over, someone's died. So I don't think putting such a menacing presence in a place that you want to feel safe and you want to have students want to come, having like someone that has like a gun on one hip or handcuffs or a taser on the other one walking around, and they already kind of feel like a little bit more superior because it's like, yeah, I can protect myself if you try to come at me. But more times than not, it's them coming at the students. And I feel like it's not a good environment, especially if there's a school that has like younger children. You don't want them seeing, their older brother or sister getting slung around. Or most times, like if there's a fight and this people crowd, they instigate. Sometimes the wrong person ends up getting hurt and dealt with. Other than the fight getting broken up, someone could, be pushed or hit, slip and fall. And I just feel like it's not safe. And speaking to what I see, at worst, they are preparing Black students for the prison pipeline. That's true, because if you have them having bad experience outside of school with police, how do you think they're going to come in when they come?
So Christian, I think we lost your audio. Well, that's too bad. So Christian, we will come back to you and Christian, can you hear us?
Yeah, my internet just blinked
out.
That's okay. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, so I recently saw a video of a girl at a school. She was Black. She was getting bullied by a group of white kids, and the officer thought it would be a good idea to tase her, and she fell and hit her head like on the seat of the table. And I'm like, and she wasn't moving. I was like so scared because I'm like, this is exactly why this is not a good idea, especially if they already have handcuffs or something. Why do you need to give them a taser and pepper spray and probably some type of gun or something? The way they de-escalate situations is not safe.
And that's horrible. And I think, we try to teach kids to have conflict management skills and be resourceful and to think about power dynamics, but we have to think about how are we modeling that for children if we have police in classrooms who are potentially using violence. So I wanted to get back to a little bit, Mohammed, you were talking about some of the divestment work that you've done. Can you talk a little bit about kind of the organizing and advocacy strategies that you're using to divest resources away from police officers and policing and to other critical needs that students have in the district?
Yeah. So obviously, during this past year, we kind of saw the tragedies that shattered our hearts across America. And then also relating that to the experiences of students and understanding what they've gone through. 482, we kind of launched a campaign to divest from school police and turn that money and invest into students. So as we have started this campaign, the current budget is set in stone, like Dylan explained that the district has. And the plan is over the next span of next years, we want to take that money and reallocate it to student needs. So we're setting ourselves short-term goals, like for example, over a span of years, we want 25% of that budget moved to student needs, and from there on, moving the entire budget with time. So in terms of organizing and advocacy, I think a lot of it, like you've seen these op-eds and student experiences, sharing those is some of the strategies that we've been using to elaborate or like push this campaign. And I think ultimately the educational piece, so today's event and the research piece that I've been working on as an intern and other youth across 482 have been working as. So I think ultimately all of that relates to what I just saw in the chat, is that it's an opportunity gap, not a achievement gap. So I think we highlight Detroit as as a district that lacks student achievement, but this campaign, this divesting from police and investing into student needs, our focus is kind of to show that students in Detroit lack the opportunities and the resources that need to be provided to them. So yeah, I'm excited to see where our campaign leads, and I believe when we divest the money from police and put it into the right resources into the student needs, it's going to help not only raise the district's educational level, but also give students opportunities to compete with people across the state.
Yeah, absolutely. Does anyone else want to jump into that and discuss the police-free schools movement?
I don't know if anyone in here has ever worked in a public school before that had police in it, but I worked as an in-school suspension teacher for a while in Nebraska, where I'm from, before coming here for grad school and then staying. And and then I also worked in a public school in St. Paul, Minnesota, when I was working as a school social work intern. It's something else seeing a grown man or a grown person slam an adolescent against a locker, for nothing. And in every situation where there has been an altercation between an adult and a child, you, like, y'all are youth, but also comparatively children, right? It could have been resolved, And I think the issue that I come up with a lot when we have conversations about getting cops out of schools is that we go to this cataclysmic hypothesis. What could happen if a weapon's brought to school? What could happen if, there's a school shooter? The fact of the matter is, just like Dr. Bell was showing, a lot of these metal detectors don't even work. And depending on who's watching those metal detectors, and depending on the rapport between security officers and students, oftentimes students just bypass those metal detectors anyway, right? And the fact of the matter is, if you know anything about Detroit, or if you've ever worked in a similar setting as Detroit public schools, you know that if a kid is bringing a weapon to school or anything that might be classified as a weapon, it ain't for the school, it's for the walk home. You know what I'm saying? And that's on the real. School is supposed to be a safe space for people. It's supposed to be a place to escape from maybe something that's going on at home. Or if you have a good home life, it's supposed to be an escape into another set of learning. right? It's supposed to be another place of development. And the fact of the matter is, you don't see cops in Farmington Hills. You don't see cops in like Royal Oak or in Grosse Pointe. You don't have cops in schools. The only reason that we think it's necessary is because we are black and brown. That's the only reason that we have cops in these schools. Because in my knowledge, I haven't heard of any documented case in the last 3 years since I've been here of a shooting at Detroit public schools, right? And I'm not sure that there were a whole lot of documented shootings at schools that warranted cops being in schools, but more black kids were going to school. So for me, this is, to Christian's very good point, it doesn't make sense to put trained people who are supposed to handle escalated or further escalate situations into school. It would make more sense to implement and input more mental health resources and social support resources for students, but not people who aren't familiar with the communities that our kids are coming from, right? Because social work is a profession that also has a past of discrimination and bias and harm, right? So you need people who are not only trained in mental health and wellness based work, but also people who are actually familiar with the people that they're going to be working with in Detroit. Neither of whom are represented in the police body and the security bodies that are in our schools.
Yeah, I would like to kind of add on to what Dylan said. If you think about it, they're putting the police in the wrong place, because last time I checked, it's the white kids going up into these schools shooting it up, and those are the places where you need security. You don't need security in like that type of security presence in a place where, okay, two kids getting into a fist fight, so let me tase one of them. You know, you could easily just pull these kids apart, you know, and if that's a problem, that there's so much fighting in your school, that means, I'm sorry, my mom's watching TV. It just means that whatever you're doing as a school with your disciplinary actions is not working. Like my school, for example, has a zero tolerance, but still people still fight. So what I'm thinking is, if you want to stop fights from happening, you have to listen to the kids when they come to you telling you, I have a problem with someone. Don't sit them in a circle with that person and be like, well, what's the problem? Why do you think? No, because the only thing that's going to do is that person's going to walk away like, oh, they snitched on me. Now I'm going to really fight them. And maybe I might get a couple other people to jump in on it. You need to get these kids, you need to figure out the root of their personal issue before you put them together with somebody else that doesn't like them first. Then maybe you won't need so much of a heavy presence. Your disciplinary actions, your suspensions, your expulsions, that only keeps the child out of school. They're not going to want to go back to school because they've missed so much. And then say a fight happens, the wrong person gets hurt, you got a lawsuit on your hands. If that parent really cares about what happened to their child, that's trouble for the school. You're wasting money in places that you don't need it. Like my school, we don't have a school nurse, we don't have a library. Somebody is sick, somebody got a headache, they can't get help, they gotta go home, they miss school. So you're putting your funding in the wrong places, is what I'm saying.
Good question. I appreciate that you brought that up. And I want to go back a little bit to the police-free schools movement, which is happening both in Detroit and nationally. Blake, I think that you dropped this link to, this is a document that's kind of an organizing snapshot of what has been really a youth-led national campaign to divest money from the police and public schools. And it really hit its peak during the Black Lives Matter movement and, the tragic loss of Black lives that we saw in 2020. And this is when the movement really took off and took some power. And across multiple cities and school districts during 2020, they were able to invest millions of dollars away from police, metal detectors, and other safety measures into school mental health and physical health resources. I wanted to mention that, and also Blake, if you could share that link in the chat, that would be great, to that document. So that also kind of brings me to a question for you, Dr. Bell. I don't know if your research has shown this, but what are the outcomes that we see in schools that have more police versus more mental health, more social workers?
Yes, definitely. So the heavy presence of law enforcement, as Christian and Dylan have alluded to, it really just discourages kids from coming to class. When you think about what it takes to actually get into a class, and I actually show a diagram of this in my criminal justice classes, if you can imagine just walking through a metal detector and every single day, having your back searched, having to, in many cases, be pat down like airport level security, and enduring that presence every single day. In many cases, kids are nervous or fearful. What is going to happen to me today? And they don't come back. And I think that's one of the reasons why you see so much transience in the Detroit population, changing schools in the middle of the school year and at the end of the school year so frequently, because students don't feel comfortable in particular schools. And I think this kind of alludes or creates a bridge to even my next slide on the young lady who was strip searched. Can you imagine walking into a school and having to take off, your shirt, your pants, your socks, your shoes? Now, number one, it's illegal. Number two, it's traumatizing. And how do you walk back into a school and confront the officer or officers who strip searched you in a bathroom along with a few other girls? How do you ever get over that experience? In many cases, I think we have to realize that kids are coming to school, and in most cases, they're trusting the officials. They're believing that everybody is there to do the right thing until they show them that they're not doing the right thing. And for a child who has placed their complete faith in the school, this is devastating. And if you can just read that quote and just picture yourself in that situation, it's traumatizing. In schools that have more mental health resources and more social workers, I think it's a much more supportive environment. Students have described this as a more welcoming environment, and they can see themselves being successful in that environment. And I think that's so important. When you're sitting in an environment where there's metal detectors, school guards, law enforcement officers, there's no books, there's no resources, you can't take a book home to do your homework. Many of the students in my study stated that they had to take pictures of books, pictures of the pages in order to do their homework because they could not take the books home. How can you picture yourself being successful in that setting? Even further, I've had students tell me that in addition to the hyper surveillance they endured in public schools in Detroit, they didn't even have a class. They were literally walking around every single day looking for a room in order to do some work. And in some cases, there was no work even distributed. So it's just like security measures, it's just compounding the anti-Blackness. Anti-Blackness is not just the hyper surveillance alone, it's the collective display of hyper surveillance, the lack of resources, and the lack of mental health services that combine to tell kids that you're not worth investing in. You're not worth it. We don't see you going to college. That's what these messages are telling kids. We don't see you going to college. We see you going to prison. And that's why you see, the metal detectors, the guards. And for the kids, it makes sense. And they either choose to leave, or in many cases, they self-sabotage.
Right, and it's got to just negatively affect learning outcomes even more for
Exactly.
Black and brown students, right? They're afraid to go to school, so they don't show up. Also, you would think that if these, if the presence of police and metal detectors in schools is being justified with, well, they prevent violence, we know that having social workers in school and having mental health resources is what really helps prevent violence and bullying. So it's tragic. I want to jump back a little bit to talking about what is being done now and how can other people support this movement. Mohammed, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more about like the work that you're doing, the advocacy strategies that have worked, and how others can help.
Yeah, I think in terms of advocacy or the campaigns that we're leading, we kind of started recently, so it's kind of a lot of it is in the initial stages. So a lot of help that we can do is similar to this, is a lot of education around this. So I think a lot of people lack the education behind this. People don't understand the circumstances of students in Detroit because they're not aware of it. I believe events like this and continue to have events like this will be helpful. And I just want to briefly touch on Dylan's point, is that ultimately Detroit students, when an issue comes up, it's either a police officer that has to handle it because our school is so underfunded with counselors and mental health resources. So when students get expelled or disciplined and suspended from the district, they have no place to go. They cannot attend another Detroit public schools again. So if a student in Detroit lives in Detroit and they get expelled from Detroit public schools, where are they supposed to go and relocate and become a student again? You're literally banishing them from getting a proper education, and you're setting their life up for failure. And it's through your policies and things of that nature that have brought people here. So I think in terms of Detroit's case, I know we're gonna continue our advocacy to divest from police, and in terms of help, we'd like to get our peers, our and other people across the state and the city kind of educated on the issue and be willing to support and kind of step in and support people that are leading the work in different communities. So I think in terms of overall the where it hits for me personally with this whole thing is that ultimately we I liked what Dr. Bell said. We kind of tell Detroit students that you're not worth investing in. Because we don't invest in their education at all. We invest in policing them, and that's how the situation in Detroit's currently set up. But I believe if we were to divest from police and invest in students, they would become some of the brightest people in our world. Because I go to school with some of the intellectual people, but they lack the resources. And in order to give them the resources, we need to divest from these security measures and move our money into students.
Yeah, we have some really great questions in the chat. I want to thank you, Mohammed, for sharing that. Christian, do you want to add anything to that as well?
Yeah, so my organization, Detroit Hills Detroit, we've also been very active in the defund. We have a billboard up. We've collected stories from people that have had experience. We've had meetings. We have like little healing circles for trauma. We have we do healing care kits. We send them out to people. And also we had a 12 days of defund the police around the holidays. And we're always looking for like more people to come on board and help us out with everything. Because we can't do this by ourselves. The school board, they're not going to listen to, one little, group of people. We need everyone to come in together, come in hard, come in strong, because that's the only way we're gonna get our point across. And another way you could help is you just have to keep in mind that when these police officers do happen to get suspended, most times it's with paid leave. These consequences aren't strong enough for them, because they'll go or say they get fired, they'll take their little time off, and then they'll be working at another school. This incident will happen again. It's an endless cycle. You need to start holding these officers accountable. People need to start taking legal action against them, because this is not okay. Another thing you guys can do to help is, it's in the most respectful way possible, but you can just stop talking and listen, because students are not going to tell you when they have a problem with an authority figure, because they don't want to be looked at like, oh, well, you have to be respectful, they're older than you, blah, blah, blah. You have to listen to these kids when they telling you, I don't like such and such. I don't like the way they handle such and such, or I got hurt one time because somebody was fighting and they pushed me or something. You need to listen to us when we telling you, because we want to come to school, but we're not going to come to school if we're getting, tossed around, or we're getting suspended, or you're not handling it right. So there's fights all the time. We're not going to want to come to school. If you want us to come to school, make it an environment that's safe for us and safe for everyone. So that's what I say, just listen.
Thank you so much, Christian. And I think that this conversation has huge implications for social work practitioners or policymakers, or for those of us that are working with children or are getting our certification to become school social workers, thinking about how can we really be anti-racist in our work? How can we come in and understand how some systems and institutions are set up to not always make children thrive, but sometimes can help them really fail? And how do we get involved? And I want to say to Christian and Mohammed and to Dylan, we're having this conversation because we want to help connect students on this call to action in communities. So if you have events coming up, if you have meetings, if you have resources you'd like to share, please send them to us, and we'll make sure to get them out to everyone.
I just dropped one of Detroit Hills Detroit's events that's coming up. They have a racial healing circle that I'm sure Christian and also I think Sarita, executive director of DHDC, is also on the call, that they can talk about more. But I can also send them to Aisha, and then Aisha, you can send them to the rest of the folks.
Yeah, do that. So I want to move to a little bit of some question and answer. But actually, before we do that, why don't we have any closing thoughts from our presenters? Is there anything, Dr. Bell, that you would like to add, or any of our other presenters today?
I'll go first. So I think on one hand, we have to motivate and we have to organize and get involved and raise awareness. And I think part of the problem is a lack of education. I also think a even more important issue is handling the staunch sort of advocates of policing in public schools. How do we convince these individuals who don't envision any other sort of schooling model for Black youth, but hyper-surveilled schools and metal detectors and guards, and they feel that you deserve this. This is what you should have in your school districts. Even when I was recruiting through my school discipline study, if you recall, Michigan actually passed a series of House bills, 5618 through 5621, in 2016 that reformed school discipline. You have to consider a student's age, disciplinary factors, and a bunch of other issues before you render any kind of punishment. And many administrators in the Detroit area are just not following it. They don't care about it because there's no penalty in the law that prevents them from, not using a suspension. They told me with a straight face that we've been disciplining kids in this way for 30 years. This is how we're going to handle it. And there's nothing you can do to stop me. That law is worthless because it doesn't penalize me for doing it. So I think on one end, we would like to believe that a lack of education on these issues is the problem. When in actuality, when we look at public schools, and I'm talking to a lot of these officials, they know exactly what they're doing. They know that policing hurts students. They know that the resources harm students. And they are very clear on the message that they're sending to kids. They know exactly what they're sending. And I think it's just that continuous belief that you're not worth investing in. We do not see you going to college. Some of you will make it. Many of you will not. And we're not going to invest the money to even, promote success in this environment because we don't believe you're worth it. And I think that's, subconsciously, I think that is the greatest problem that we have in our society right now, particularly in the Detroit area, where you have people who are in privileged positions in our education system who do not view our children as college-bound, successful individuals. They view them as future inmates.
Thank you, Dr. Bell. And I think too, what is the message that we're sending students of Black and Brown communities when instead of resources, I mean, we've talked about this throughout this call, but we have police. And I think it's really reinforcing those racist tropes that Black and Brown communities have a propensity for violence, that they're not worth that investment. So these are all really powerful points. There are some really great questions coming in the chat, and I'd like to give people an opportunity to ask them. Max, and you don't have a last name here, but I can unmute you if you would like. You asked, are there people who we can campaign for in the next board election cycle who embody these goals? That's a great question. Basically, I was wondering that too. Does Detroit Heals Detroit or 4824, do you guys endorse candidates that you see going up for school board that embody some of the values that align with having police-free public schools?
So as a 501c3, we can't, because that as a nonprofit, we can't endorse folks, but we try to talk to everybody, right? And the youth can talk about this more than I can, because something that was really cool that happened in September, October of 2020 was that our youth actually interviewed all the school board candidates as they were running, right? And so of the 14 people that were running, only 2 said that they wanted to get cops out of schools. Most of them said, and I don't think any of them won, actually. No, one of them did. Misha Stallworth did. But I think to answer another question that I saw from Max as well, and also Amanda, about like, who can we support, who's going to be in the school board, running for school board in 2024 legislatures, that's really important. But I think what we're trying to do at 482 Forward is to really work from the ground up instead of the top down, because the top down approach hasn't really worked since the beginning of this country, right? So we need to make it very clear that legislatures or school board members are accountable to the people that elected them, right? And that if they are not held accountable, we ain't going to reelect you next time. So it's really about creating community power, or really harnessing the community power that's already there by saying, no, you're accountable to us. Here are our demands. We don't really care what your agenda is. If you want to be elected, you have to follow this agenda, right? Because we need to have much more say in what, in how our schools are formed and what policies are going into place, state policy on education and local policies on how we discipline or intervene when there are behaviors that we need to address. Right, because the current way is not working. So we don't endorse candidates. It's really important to do your research, which is what our youth did. But at the end of the day, one of the things that we really try to do is to have conversations and schedule youth-led meetings with legislatures or school board members to have them actually think about how they can further center the voices and also the demands of the students that they claim to represent.
Make a comment here about this?
Oh, go ahead.
Yes. In addition to that approach, Dylan, what I would highly encourage you to do, because I have some experience in politics, and what I found is that candidates will, when they're in front of you, they will give you all the great, all the great answers that you're looking for, and then when they get in office, they completely do the opposite. What I would like to see the youth do is actually produce candidates amongst themselves. I think a lot of times we're so used to looking for a candidate that will support us and will think like us, when in actuality, we have to realize the power is with us. And no one is in a better position to advocate for the youth than someone from 482 Forward. I think we have to look at within these sort of silos and organizing silos that we have all this information, you have all the data, you have all the talking points that you need. And what we need to do is we need to take that and mobilize it into political action instead of looking for a candidate, produce one within our organizations ourselves.
I would just like to quickly add, as soon as for whatever the outcome of us with defund the police, I think the next thing we should definitely get on is school abolishment, because another problem is these subjects in school, they're not really beneficial. I think we should start working on getting rid of the subjects that we don't need to replace them with subjects that'll actually help us out in the real world. So I think that's something we should also think about next after this.
Thank you for that, Christian, and to all of you. So I want to get to some questions in the chat. There's been some really interesting stuff going on. So Adisa, I'm going to give you a chance to unmute yourself here and ask your question. So why don't you go ahead?
All right, can everybody hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
All right, great. Great discussion. I appreciate it. Everybody, very good. As I was listening, I was talking to a colleague privately in the chat, and I think I put a question in here. Is there any space for us to hear from the Detroit Police Department or a city official regarding some of the issues that have been raised. Myself, I'm a product of Philadelphia Public Schools. And so much of what has been said really resonates as I experienced many of these things and more in the 90s as I went through my high school years. But as I heard what was said, what occurred to me was where's the balance or the nuance or the reaction? So if I was writing a paper on this stuff, I would try to work in, okay, what are the cops saying? What is their response? Let's get the cops here. So, or whoever the decision maker is, let's get them here. Let's have this panel. Let's offer the statistics. Let's offer the firsthand experience. Now, in contrast, what do you say to that city official? Without that, it feels more like an echo chamber to me. So I'm curious, maybe you guys reached out or something like that. But if we didn't, it'd be good if we did. So there you go.
It's a great question. Dylan, has any work taken place where there's been facilitated conversations with the police department or
yeah, so before he resigned, the former chief of Detroit Public Schools Police Department, Chief Godby, had been working with 482 over the past 2 years, because this has been a conversation that's been going on for a while within 482 about how do we transition cops out of schools, right? Because that's a big question, and I really appreciate what Adisa was saying, because it's not easy, because we have to think about how we're defining safety and how we ensure safety in every regard with our students, right? And so part of that was speaking to the school police department. And so Chief Godby did agree that he wanted to get cops out of schools. And so he was working with us to talk about what a transition would look like. And since his resignation, his deputy chief, who's now the actual chief of Detroit Public Schools, we're working on getting a meeting with him as well to continue that conversation to see if those values are still held. And based on those meetings that we're going to be having the next couple of weeks, we'll be moving forward. Because then, there's questions of, okay, we have 121 school police officers employed. Where do they go? Right. And so it's a big question. And so I really appreciate that question.
That's a great question. Do we have any other questions? Do you want to put it in the chat? I think there's some here. Sonia, you had a question. What is DPSCD administration response to these demands? I'm going to go ahead and unmute you, Sonia, or you can probably unmute yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Aisha. So this all sounds so like sane and reasonable, and you're making a case for a way forward. What is Detroit Public Schools administrative response? The board, what are they saying about this? What are they going to do about it?
Yeah, so I think in all honesty, it varies person to person in the administration. They haven't come up with a collective way and a response to this. Like Dylan mentioned, there's one board member that's willing to move towards getting cops out of schools, while other board members are really not for it. And we spoke to the deputy superintendent, and her personal opinion was, I'm really not for it. While compared to, I had a Twitter war with our superintendent, kind of pushed him, especially in the middle of the Black Lives Matter movement. We were kind of going back and forth, and our school district kind of held a march in downtown Detroit. And my point was, I know you guys are doing the talking. Are you guys willing to do the work? And that was my kind of push to Dr. Viti, who's very active on Twitter. And his response is that he's willing to get cops out of school, but the process, in his opinion, is not that simple. So it's very complex. So over time, he wants to get cops out of school. But again, that's on Twitter, and that's what he said to a bunch of students. So I think overall, we as youth and as organizers and as advocates need to continue the message so we can get a broader collective of the administration to agree. There's pockets of people in the administration that share our vision, but there's a lot of more work to be done to kind of get the entire collective to understand the situation that students go through. And I think more importantly, the work that 482 and DHDC are doing is that they're elevating the voices of students and making sure that those voices of students are being heard by the leaders of our school and the city. And I think that's our next step forward, is letting students speak and making sure that these administrators are willing to listen.
Can I just share one more thought? I feel like there has to be some support provided the district to think about how to transition the investment from police into counselors and educational staff and other support staff in the schools to help with violence and other safety issues for kids. So where is that support, and how can it be mobilized to kind of map out a way forward for the school district? Because they have to first prioritize this issue, then invest resources in figuring out that way forward and mapping the path. So, Dr. Bell, I'm thinking, is there support that can be provided the district to think about how to transition from investing in police to investing in other support services?
Yeah, I'm glad you came to me because I had some really strong thoughts about this issue. So I actually presented all of my research, literally everything that I have, all 150 interviews I've conducted with Detroit parents and students to administration at DPS. I presented this information in 2018, I believe. And we see there has been very little change, if anything at all. So again, I want to reiterate the fact that we can talk to administrators. They can say all the right things in your face, but if there's no real action being taken, then what's the point? And I think that's the real problem. There's a culture of punishment that has existed in our schools that dates all the way back to even before the 90s, probably within the late 80s, when those metal detectors were embedded in Detroit public schools in 1985. And changing that is going to be a huge endeavor. And I think before we even get to the point of prioritizing resources and things like that, we have to really understand that what's fueling this. The underlying problem is that people who are regulating our schools do not view our children as college-bound, capable children. That's why the metal detectors are there. That's why the police are there. That's why the theft, I call it the theft of resources, because we know that we're taking books. We know that we're taking resources from kids. You can't convince me that as a principal or an administrator that you believe your kids are actually going to go to college when they don't have writing utensils, books. It's a no-brainer. You know exactly what you're doing. It's conscious. It's been happening generation after generation at this point. You can look at the graduation rates, look at the suspension rates. It's very clear what this model is doing. And at some point, we have to realize that some people in administrative positions must approve of this model. They must really like it, because if they didn't like it, they would dismantle it. And the fact that organizations like 484 are presenting their information, I'm presenting my information to them. Other organizations are presenting their information, and nothing has changed. I think that speaks volumes.
Thank you both. I was thinking, are there any, and this goes to a question, Sonia, I think you also put in the chat, how about legislation at the state level? Are there any initiatives at the state level around this issue?
Yes. So we also work with MEJC, which is the Michigan Education Justice Coalition. And so with them, we're mapping out essentially a 10-year revenue campaign, right? Which is in terms of statewide funding, we're currently in a $3.7 billion education deficit, right? And so, there's the CARES Act money that we're getting from the federal government because of the pandemic, right? But that's only a one-time payment, or that's not going to last forever. How do we fill that gap, right? And how do we create revenue? And there are a lot of ways to do that, right? And so, and part of that is one thing that 482 Forward is also working on is getting a graduated income tax initiative placed on the ballot for 2022. Is that right? 2022? Yes. Because currently in Michigan, we don't have one. Graduated income tax means that you are taxed in proportion to your income. Currently in Michigan, we all get taxed the same rate, which means that people who make the higher echelons of in terms of revenue are paying about 6%, 6.7% of their income into taxes with everything that goes into it. The bottom echelons, people that are making 17,000 and below, are paying about 10% of their income into taxes, right? That's not right. If we had a graduated income tax, then we would fill that deficit per year by creating a pot of money that can go specifically to education, right? That could be then funneled into the schools that need the most funding, right? And so that's part of the statewide organizing work. But to Dr. Bell's point, part of the issue is you can suggest as much policy as you want, but part of this work too is really changing mindsets. And it's not even just the mindsets of administrators, it's also the mindsets of teachers and of parents. We have to think about, and again, this is a huge challenge that we are ready to take on with 482 and our partners, is how do we identify and define safety in schools? What exactly does that mean, right? Are we talking about physical safety? Are we talking about emotional mental health safety, right? Because if we don't define that, then we're not going to get rid of cops in schools, because the first thing that I'm sure a lot of you think about when you think of safety is physical. Right. And again, the fact that we're employing police in schools means that we don't believe, one, that students can take care of themselves and they can practice some type of autonomy even at the tender age of 18. Come on, we send kids off to college, but they can't practice bodily autonomy. Two, we don't have enough faith in our administrators and teachers to handle behavioral issues, which also means that we don't have any other support staff in the building to handle acute problems that teachers are not capable of handling. Right. And so and why is that? Why are we turning to a very, physical escalatory source of protection? And who are we trying to protect? It's because we're afraid of our students, right? There is a fear there. And that's like a scary thought. But there is fear, just as Aisha said, just as everybody on this panel has said, there is a fear associated with Black and brown bodies. So how do you get around that? It's through listening sessions. It's through conducting community-based surveys, which are conducted by community members, right? And it's getting that data as well as the quantitative data of the expulsions. By the way, 100% of the expulsions in 2020 and in 2019 were Black students in DPSCD, which is wild to me. 100%, which I found out on the Civil Rights, the Office of Civil Rights website, which is wild. We need to, it's a multifaceted issue, which means we need a multifaceted approach. But very much like Adisa was saying, or like Dr. Bell was saying, we need to get people from the community elected into local and statewide offices, right? And we have support, very much so, like from Rashida Tlaib, Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib. But the issue is that support can only go so far if the groundwork isn't being done. And so part of this is statewide coalitions are needed. Because we need to know our stuff, right? But the other issue is that we have to control the narrative in terms of how we get this work done, which means too, we have to practice some type of civil disobedience to get people to actually listen to us. So a tactic that we've used before in partnership with people like DAM and My Students Dream and other folks in our network in DHD is doing walkouts, particularly on count day. Because count day, if you don't know, is the day that they count all the students that are in a district and they get funding according to how many students they have per head. If you don't have any students show up to class, you don't get no money, right? But then in order to do that, you have to get parents involved and to be down with that, right? That's difficult. You have to talk to parents about why we're doing this. You have to get parents to think about, okay, you know what? My kid's safety can be ensured in other ways, right? And so it's a whole community-based conversation that can't be hinged on just policy. Policy comes from people, and people impact policy. And too often, we're not giving people the agency they need to impact the policy that isn't representing them. Does that make sense?
Can I chime in here as well? So in terms of school discipline issues and even policing issues, what I found, again, that House Bill 5,618 and through 5,621, this was enacted in 2016, it actually made it difficult for schools to suspend students and so, to subject them to other sort of, structurally violent interventions that were not really helpful. So you have to consider a child's disability, the severity of the offense, their age, before you render any kind of punishment. And again, as I said before, that bill was supposed to decrease school suspensions. And what I actually found through the Freedom of Information Act is that it actually increased suspensions in many cases. So when school administrators saw that bill, they just figured, we've been suspending kids, we've been throwing kids out of school for 30 years, we're not going to change. We don't really care about restorative justice interventions, and there's nothing you can do about it, pretty much. And in addition to that mindset, at around 2016 and prior to that, you could go on the school's profile report in Detroit Public Schools, and you can find out exactly how many students were suspended in each school. The suspension data was posted, disaggregated, and separated by disciplinary type, infraction type. That information is gone. If you are a citizen in Detroit Public Schools, you have no idea how many suspensions are being issued every year in the district. One of the things I did is I actually submitted a Freedom of Information Act to the Detroit Public Schools District every year since 2015 to collect that data. I wanted to know. And what I found, again, is that every year after the school discipline reforms were enacted, school suspensions increased dramatically. The final year, I believe Detroit Public Schools served about 49,000 students, and they issued nearly 19,000 suspensions in 1 year. 19,000. I have the data, and I can send it to you if you want it, and it will be in my upcoming book, Suspended, as well, which will be released in a few weeks for pre-order and in September for actual order. And in addition to those numbers, I think that as a community first, how do we hold the district accountable if we don't have access to the numbers? Again, if you are a citizen, you have no access unless you are requesting it through the Freedom of Information website. It's not on the Civil Rights Center website. It's not anywhere else. You can't find it. It took me 4 months to get it from Detroit Public Schools. They wouldn't give it to me because they knew exactly what they were hiding. So in addition to that, what I did was I actually wrote a legislative proposal, and I'm working with several state representatives in the Detroit area to amend this series of bills and actually promote transparency. School discipline data should be free. It should be available online. You should be able to click on the Detroit Public Schools website or any district in Michigan website and access that data. It should not be hidden. You should not have to pay a fee to access that data, which is what some districts are also doing as well. I've had districts that would charge $2,000 to collect the data. Well, what parent could collect that data or pay that fee for the data? So they're hiding, many cases, racial disparities in school discipline behind a fee. I've had other districts that would send the data, but they would send it in such disorganized fashion that it would take months to actually unravel exactly what they sent because they want to hide this information from all of us. The legislature can't hold districts accountable for school discipline reform if the district doesn't release the data and they hide behind the Freedom of Information Act. That is a serious problem that I really want everybody to be aware of, and that we need some legislative report around it. And I've actually, again, submitted a proposal to legislators. We're working on a bill, and that bill is going to need a lot of support. So I'll be in touch with more updates on my progress in that initiative.
Share those resources, those House bills, your upcoming book. I mean, that's such a powerful issue, talking about how data is not shared transparently. And if you could share more about that issue, that would be great. And we will be sending all these resources out to everyone. So Dr. Trina Shanks, you had a question. I'm going to ask to unmute you if you want to go ahead and ask it.
All right. Thanks, everyone. This has been really informative. I just wanted to ask from either the 482 youth and Dylan or Dr. Bell, are there examples of Detroit Public Schools that are handling discipline and safety issues well, in your opinion? Because rather than hypothetically, if money was taken away, what would it be used for? If there's schools that are actually doing what you'd like to uphold as a model, that might be another approach. So I just wonder, are there any schools that are doing it better, or are they all pretty bad, in your opinion?
I'll say something really quickly and then I'll be done. But we did a lot of surveying last year before we even, chose to put on this campaign. And so we surveyed, Mohammed and Christian, help remind me, but I think we surveyed roughly between 600 and 700 students over the course of about 4 months before the beginning of the 2020-2021 school year. And and these questions were ranging from school safety, school climate, returning back to school in a time of COVID, all this stuff. And not in everyone, but in all the cases where we had Detroit public school students responding to questions about school police and safety, 90% of those students said that they didn't feel safe with police in schools. And they said that their schools didn't handle it well. Now, like I said, there are 50,000 people, students within Detroit public schools. So we need much more data to get to that sense. And I would hope that there are schools that are doing this well. But based on the data that we have, it is pretty pessimistic view.
Dr. Bell, in addition, do you know of any schools in Detroit or elsewhere that have either transitioned from police or doing police and safety and discipline better than the norm?
I've conducted several interviews throughout the Detroit Public Schools area, and I have not heard from one student who approved of the disciplinary policies or of the sort of policing at their schools. In my experience, I'm thinking of all the interviews, and I can't think of one where a student said that my school doesn't have police officers, we don't have metal detectors. This is sort of universal throughout the Detroit Public Schools area. Now, there is one charter school that I have talked about in previous years, and I'm pretty sure it's closed at this point, which is kind of tragic. But I remember this charter school, the principal was kind of frustrated with his teachers, as the teachers were complaining about the students who were coming in. They weren't doing their homework. They were kind of, weren't paying attention in class. And what the principal realized is that the teaching staff all lived in suburban areas, and they were sort of driving into Detroit and had no idea what was actually going on in the Detroit community and what their students were dealing with on the way home and in school. So he arranged a field trip for the staff. He got a bus, he took the staff throughout the neighborhood where the schools served, and they were able to see the environments the children were navigating as they were leaving the school. He explained the challenges that they were experiencing at home in many cases or on the way to school. And as Dylan kind of alluded to, students don't feel safe on the way home. And in many cases, that's a microcosm of what they feel in school. So after that sort of field trip for the school staff, they completely changed the culture in the school. And I think that's the key point, is getting to know your students, understanding what is going on in your students' lives, and creating a safe space in a school where students feel comfortable to talk about these kind of issues. I think one of the most tragic things we see in the Detroit Public Schools community is that you see kids that are experiencing a multitude of challenges, and they have all of the sort of determination to persevere and achieve at the highest levels possible, but there's no space in the community or in their homes, or in many cases at school, a place where you should be able to talk about this kind of stuff, to talk about the challenges that you're experiencing. School is very rigid. There's no chance for a child to learn what they really want to learn in many cases, or initiate the kind of conversations that they want to talk about, and they're shut out in many cases. So if we create a open and inclusive environment in schools where students feel comfortable, I think you'll see these kind of transitions take place. And if we educate staff on what the students are dealing with and how to approach students, I think you'll have those changes. But again, it starts with viewing the children as capable children and as not as future prison-bound children. And that mental challenge is, in my experience, very difficult to achieve in many cases. And it's unfortunate.
Well, I want to thank you all so much. And I think that we are going to round up. I want to just say that thank you all for sharing the powerful work that you're doing and on this issue with all of us. I mean, this is a human rights issue, it's a social work issue. We really need to think about as a society how and why we criminalize Black bodies, Black and brown bodies, especially those of children. And what is it doing to all of us by doing that? So I'm going to turn it over to Trina. I want to thank you all again for joining. And again, we will get your resources out to the participants. Trina, I'm going to turn it over to you. And if you could just do some closing and reminders, that would be great.
All right. Well, thank you to all of our panelists. You guys have been amazing and have given us many things to think about. But for those of you who are either part of the class or interested in future sessions, you can get field credit for attending these sessions. You can look at past discussions on our webpage. And our next virtual discussion is going to be the movement for economic equity in Detroit. So it's going to be another great discussion on March 4th. So we hope you can join us then. For those who are in the mini course with Aisha, all of us are going to sign off, but you guys need to stay on to have your debrief session. So thank you to Dr. Bell, to Dylan, to Christian, to Mohammed. Best wishes in your work going forward. And hopefully we can all be helpful in this movement as you guys continue to work. Have a great afternoon, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. And yes, please let us know how we can join your movement and your work.